Today we have Kylie Taitano with us. And Kylie has a very interesting background. Not only is she a senior software engineer at Intuit, she's a former candidate for Congress, California 50. She's also a competitive Polynesian dance person. So you've been done a lot of competitions in dancing, which is interesting for someone who's an engineer. And you also co-founded Code with her. So what I really like about Kylie is she just goes for it. She launches herself into new experiences, and that takes a lot. It's not easy. Sometimes we're so scared of failure and rejection and what people are going to think of us and not being good in something new, or, oh, this is so inconsistent with what I do. I'm not going to launch myself. I'm not going to do this experience. But Kylie has none of that. She just goes for it. We're going to talk a little bit more about that and her experience in doing all of these things. So welcome, Kylie. I'm so excited that you're here with us today.
Thank you so much for inviting me. I'm so excited for this chat.
So far, you've had all these experiences launching yourself into all these incredible opportunities. Maybe you didn't even know anyone who had done these things before, and there you are trying these new things out. What were some of the struggles you had, and specifically with co-founding the Code with her? And that one is really hard because you have to influence people, you have to get people on board, get customers on board. What are some of the learnings that you had there regarding communication and the struggles that you had as well?
Yeah, I'm half Filipina, half Chamorro. Chamorro people are the indigenous people of the U.S. Pacific Island territory of Guam, where I was born and raised. And one thing that I love about island culture that I do actually see in lots of other cultures as well, indigenous cultures specifically, is that there's just a huge sense of community. So we have a word in Chamorro called inafamalik, which literally means to make good. And the whole idea behind it is that you treat everybody with respect, reciprocity, but most importantly, when you come into privilege, that you give the privilege that you have gained back to the community. That's what my values are aligned with, and everything that I've pursued has been because of my culture and enough Alex. My mom told me this after I've done everything that I've done, and she was like, yeah, I used to get a lot of flack when you were 10 years old because you were doing piano, you were student council president of your elementary school, whatever that means, spelling bee champion, math olympiad champion, you were in performing arts, doing stage work, and of course school, and I'm the oldest sibling. Yeah, she used to get flack for people asking her, why are you making her do all this stuff? And she was like, it's not me, it's all her. And I can honestly say that is me. I just love to do a lot of things, but especially when it comes to the privilege part of my background, I accidentally fell into computer science. It was not my first choice major at all. I went to UC San Diego for my computer science degree. My original choice was aerospace engineering, but again, by the stroke of luck, the universe just decided, hey, get into computer science, because that was my backup major. And this was back in 2010. So right when the tech boom just started this past decade. And honestly, it's been the best thing that's happened to me in my life. I've done really well for myself at Intuit. I'm able to live my life as an independent woman beyond my wildest dreams. Tech has just given everything that my parents have worked really hard for and more. And that's why I decided to run for Congress. I have a really great life as a tech worker, but I really am so grounded in community, which is why I ran and also started Code with her. So again, it all points back to my culture and my upbringing and enough Amalek to make good. But the second part to actually answer your question is one of the things being a Filipina and also in my Chamorro culture is you don't really speak to authority. You don't talk back. You get into a lot of trouble even if your opinion is harmless, if you have an opinion, that can be seen as a sign of disrespect to someone older than you. So for me, the biggest struggle that I've had in order to get to running for Congress or starting a nonprofit is the fact that it is okay for me to speak my opinion. And just because I speak my opinion doesn't mean I disrespect authority. So I can remember this very clearly. Like, I was just a software engineer starting my career out. And I was in a meeting with leadership, and I just felt like I hear what they're saying, they were telling me what to do basically. And I was like, I hear what they're saying, but I just don't agree with it because of the experience that I built up and just logic in my mind. I was like, I want to say something, but I felt so paralyzed in the moment that I just didn't speak up. And it was in this moment where I was like, you know what, I've got to change that. How I remedied that was honestly just by speaking a little bit unfiltered, just to get me comfortable. Even if I got 5 seconds of time to say something in a meeting or present something, I would just say it, right? And overcompensated that way. So that's how I was able to build up my confidence, was just by fake it till you make it, speak my mind, even though I didn't really feel comfortable with it. But the consequences of that as I grew into my leadership role, especially with Code with Her, was that not everybody understands the way that I communicate. And so as we grew with Code with Her, from my 3 co-founders to a group of now 7 part-time engineers, employees, and about a dozen or so volunteers, the way of communicating directly in an unfiltered way is not going to cut it, because the people that you lead are just going to take you at face value. They're not going to have years of experience like your co-founders have working with you to really translate what you actually mean. So there was a point right during the pandemic when we were growing. Code with Her was growing. I should give a little bit of background on that too. So we're a nonprofit based in San Diego, and our mission is to close the gender, diversity, and socioeconomic gaps in tech. We've served over 2,000 young women across the country, but at the time of this specific situation, we were just serving a couple hundred Girl Scouts here in San Diego County. So as we were trying to grow during the pandemic, my co-founders, they sat me down, and it was a very tough conversation where they had to give me feedback, essentially saying, you're saying things directly, you're very goal-oriented, and we get you, but the way that it's coming across to our team is that you're being basically bossy, right? Like, I'm telling people what to do. I'm being a micromanager. And of course, like, that was not my intent at all. I was just so focused on our goal, which is a good one, right? To close the gap in tech, the diversity gaps in tech, that I failed to see the bigger picture and how my words were affecting people. One of the books that I read to help me be more confident in my speaking abilities is called Crucial Conversations. And so definitely recommend that if you're having trouble not only just speaking up, but also having difficult conversations or having to initiate difficult conversations. And that book changed my life because I learned a lot in that book about having to find common ground, having to use the right words. And really, I was self-conscious about the ability to say the same thing in different ways. I use a thesaurus too to help me convey what I actually want to convey. So it took a lot of work to get there, but because I was able to practice being able to speak my message and my intent in different ways, that actually helped me a lot during my campaign, because I had my core values that I was running on, but I had to be able to speak about these values to different types of voters, different types of groups. So I can confidently say that I was able to promote my ideas in a way that anybody could really understand and get on board with. Yeah, those are my communication learnings and struggles, long-winded way of, and I'm still growing too. But that, for me, the biggest hurdle was just speaking up in general.
Yeah, and you got over it. And it seems like initially, so you didn't feel comfortable speaking up because of the way you grew up and the culture. And then you were able to speak up, but then as you became a leader, then you realized that you had to refine your approach to speaking up, which is a very natural thing, because then you were really focused on, I got to speak up to get results here, but then it wasn't landing the way you intended. So you refined that to finally get to a point where you're able to influence and get people on board when you communicate, and at the same time move everyone towards the objective and the goal. So it's a process. You got there quickly. That's a nice thing.
It's been like 10 years in progress.
Do you have maybe an example either from the non-for-profit or from running for Congress where you've adapted your communication approach to make it work better?
I evolving actually into an engineering manager in my day job. So I'm still a senior software engineer on paper, but I've most recently adopted my role as an engineering manager. And one thing I've realized that I didn't realize before was that you can say the same thing to a group of people that you work with, but they're not going to all get it at the same time. So a specific example is with operational excellence. That is something on my team that we're trying to improve on. So you can think that's like continuous deployment and delivery, making sure that we get our automated tests up, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, for the more technical people. But it's really just making sure that the operations behind getting our code out that users see is stable, and we have all the pieces in place to make sure that we're not missing anything as we deliver the code to production. My junior engineers are awesome, but I've found that having to explain the why we're doing that, I've had to adapt different ways. So some engineers get it right away if I just explain exactly what I just explained right now, that we want to make sure that we don't have any gaps as we deliver code to production. And some of my engineers get that. There are other individuals where I have to talk to more of the customer side, right? If our customers see a bug, is there any way leading up to them actually getting the feature that we're delivering for us to catch that issue ahead of time? And so when they understand the customer impact of having to have strong operational excellence, then they get it. So I know it doesn't exactly tie into Code with Her, my congressional run, but that was something that I very recently faced, and having to like change even though the message was the same, the words I had to use and the examples that I had to use were different.
That's an interesting point. It is often something that a lot of people experience, which is the message that we share lands in a different way with different people. And being able to adapt our communication based on whom we're speaking to is an art, is a science. And it takes a while, because sometimes we think that just by saying it, people will get it. And often, like in your experience, that's not the case. People have different backgrounds, different ideas. And sometimes, I don't know if you experienced this, but saying it once is also not enough.
Yeah. Repetition doesn't hurt the prayer. That's what our former CEO used to say. And that's one of the sayings that I really take to heart. Like, feel free to repeat yourself, just because somebody, and I used to be self-conscious of this, just because someone doesn't get it the first time doesn't mean that it's a reflection on you. Maybe you need to say it a different way, or maybe they need to digest it a little bit, right, over time and think about it for them to actually understand. So as long as you're not giving up, and you're finding it can be mentally exhausting to find different ways to communicate, but it works, right? As long as you're persistent on it. And the other thing that I wanted to say too, especially when it came to the political world, right? Because as we all know, it's very polarizing. Another way that I find it helpful to convey my beliefs in such a polarizing environment is to find common ground with the person that I'm talking to. So I have spoken to people who have opposite political views as I do, who have told me, sitting down, we're going to have 1% in common. And I personally like the challenge. So I'm like, okay, try me. And the way that I approach those conversations is to make it personal, right? To find something that we have in common, ask them what keeps them up at night, right? Most of the time, especially when you're talking to parents, it's their children. When you're talking to young people, it's the economy, right? Their jobs and security, which is all something that we all feel. There are millions of us in the US, but also around the world. There is so much more that ties us together than does not. And I think if you go into these conversations or environments where it can be polarizing, remember that you can find something in common with someone. And I personally used to think it was cheesy to ask someone about their weekend or how their kids are doing, or really what seems shallow stuff like that in conversation. But that's actually a really good way to start a conversation, to find something in common. Even if it's a new coffee shop they tried and you like coffee, that's at least some common ground that you can start off on.
It is a common ground, and it builds a lot of things at once, right? It creates connection. People feel like they know you a little bit better. just by having that time and conversation, it builds a bit of trust and likability. So I can see the value in that, even if it sounds a little bit cheesy initially when you're saying it. Yeah, how's the weekend? Everybody does it. It's better than how's the weather.
Yeah, exactly. And especially when I've spoken to those individuals with opposite political views as I have, they come around and they're like, oh, we have more in common than we thought. And I'm like, yep, it's just because we are not used to slowing down the conversation, slowing down to go faster, and really just taking the time, even if it's for 2 to 5 minutes. Even if you're in a very critical meeting, you have a minute to establish common ground. It really doesn't take that long.
It doesn't at all. And you can find that 1% if you look for it, that 1% commonality. Now, you're giving the example of talking to your engineers about the why and realizing that they didn't all understand it the first time you said it. How did you know that they didn't get it?
Honestly, blank faces or follow-up questions. My team is very quiet in a good way. They're the type that like speaks up. When they speak up, it's important, right? If they're silent, I can tell they're pondering. A lot of it is facial expressions too, because most of my meetings are over Zoom. And just especially as a leader, you have to be situationally aware, like all the time, right? What is the vibe in the room? What are people's faces looking like? Making sure that you create a safe space for people to ask questions and you don't make them feel stupid. Because as we all know, that's very common reason why we don't speak up is because we feel like we're asking something that might be perceived as something we should know, when that's not the case at all. Most people have the same question. And so for me, I don't only just listen for like actual clarifying questions, because people, if they want to follow up or if they're not sure, they will ask me, can you repeat that or explain it a different way? But I also look for mannerisms as well.
That's important. It's harder to do on Zoom, but also very, very critical still. When it comes to running for Congress, you shared that you had to quit your job, right? So were there any struggles there?
Yeah. Actually, I was very fortunate. I did leave my job. They held my job for me for 6 months. So that's, again, when it comes to privilege, like I knew every day that I had something to fall back on, which actually empowered me to work even harder, because not everybody has this unique opportunity to just up and leave, basically take a sabbatical and still have health insurance, still have security, still have financial security and job security, and go do this. And so for me, that was really important for me to take the privilege that I have, the security that I have, and really pour myself into the campaign. In terms of struggles, it was mentally and physically. I think like towards the end of the campaign, when we were knocking on doors, I think I cleared like 10 miles a day. Yeah, it's a pretty big district down here in San Diego. And it was so weird. I started to get carpal tunnel and neck issues, even though I've been an engineer for almost 10 years, never had those big issues until my campaign. But mentally, of course, there were a couple of times I cried on the couch because the stress was overwhelming. There was a lot of balls flying in the air, lots of things being said. And like you really, for me, what helped me get through it was at the beginning of the campaign, when I decided to run, I said, okay, what is my measure of success? Because I know this is a long shot. And yes, like on paper, success looks like winning, but what does success look for me personally? And for me, my mantras were, I'm running as myself. What on the campaign trail is the Kylie that you'll see sitting on her couch in her apartment, running to represent my culture. We don't have any Chamorro representatives that can vote in Congress, especially as a territory. And then third was, you know what, no matter how I did at the end, that I would run a campaign that would make it even a clearer path for other young women, other minorities to run after me. And I can honestly say it's been a year. I felt like I met that goal. And so during the hard parts of the campaign, I literally had that posted on my wall, or I had pieces of paper just littered. If I picked it up, my affirmations, those 3 affirmations, to remind me this is what I was doing it for and why I was doing it.
Yeah. Did you go into the campaign knowing how hard it was going to be? Because I love the idea of having those clear measurements of success for you which were not associated with actual winning necessarily, that you could lean on and remind yourself of every day to get through the whole stress of the campaign?
As you opened up, thank you for the lovely introduction. And you say I just go for it. I think maybe that's a personality fault that I have, which is, it's not that I underestimate how difficult things are going to be. I go into it thinking like, all right, we'll figure it out along the way, which is a little bit naive because I think, but to be honest, if I thought about it too much, I wouldn't have done it. And sometimes you just don't think, right? Just do it, right? Dive off into the deep end, because you're never gonna know what's gonna happen. And one of the things that I learned from all the struggle of the campaign, raising money, like it's hard begging for money, right? Really hard doing that. And I had to do that 6 to 8 hours a day. Some of the more personally hurtful things was, again, with politics, it gets weird. People who are your friends and family who will get your back in no matter what situation, when you throw politics into the mix, it changes, right? So people that you thought would support you are like, no, basically. So that was really hard to compartmentalize. Probably, honestly, that was probably the hardest thing. Not taking it personally, even though it's okay to take it personally, that the people that you trust the most just don't agree with you politically, and that's okay. But that was pretty hard. But at the end of it, for me, my biggest takeaway was to stop using the word failure in my vocabulary, because when we think, or sorry, not even stop, rework the definition of failure, and just to say, you know what, failure is a part of success. Gotta hit the bottom. You got to hit these roadblocks, sometimes really big, hard ones, sometimes small ones, and you learn from it and you will become a better person. So for me, I learned to define failure as part of success. And when I reframed that, honestly, even though I lost, I got third place, but I was the only woman and person of color in the race. When I reframed that failure as actually part of success, honestly, a year out, I'm so glad I ran, even though it took a big toll mentally, physically. It was just such a great chapter of my life. So I learned a lot from it.
Yeah, no, it is, having that growth mindset is key. I'm interested in figuring out how you actually, when your friends and family almost like rejected what you were trying to do and didn't support you, how were you able to not take it personal? It's easy to say it, but it's really hard to do.
Yeah. Yeah. It's hard to hear too, because when you're the way that works is you just call people, right? You work with your finance director and you call people to ask for money. And, it's like running a business, right? Like, I think people don't really understand, like, running a campaign, especially as someone who didn't have a background in politics, it's like starting your own business. You're trying to get your friends and family on board, trying to get funding from wherever you can. You're spreading your message in something that you really believe in. But I think in terms of starting a business versus starting a business versus running for a campaign, it's different. Politics really just throws everything into the mix. I have always been the type of person that's just, like, emotions aren't a thing, like, just move past it. But the campaign, especially those situations, really taught me it's okay to feel. Like, just feel it out, because otherwise it's going to stack up and it's going to break you if you think about that. And those tough conversations I had to have with friends and family, I let myself cry, I let myself feel bad. But another piece of advice that I got was, for every family member that rejects you, there's going to be a random stranger that believes in you. And I saw that. There were people that I called literally like 5 minutes, gave them my elevator pitch, and they'd support me and donate money. And that felt really good. Knowing that there are people who will support you, even if they don't know you. Again, establishing common interests and trust is something that I think, as shown by me experiencing those moments where just random people really believed in me in 5 minutes, shows that you don't have to have a long conversation to build rapport and build trust and build respect.
Yeah. And sometimes we don't look at who are the people that are supporting us and put more weight, more intention, more time there, because that's a lot, right? A stranger to donate money to you essentially for your vision.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool. And see that happening is pretty cool. So I think when we focus on that, it definitely helps us overcome that negative feeling like, this is worth it. When you went to your boss to basically say, because at the time you didn't know if your boss was going to give you or your company was going to give you this time off.
Yeah, I had no idea.
So you were determined to potentially lose that job. That's how much you wanted this.
Yeah, at least to try. Because again, like the tech industry has been so good to me. And I trusted again in myself and the experience I built up on the tech side that no matter what happened, like I'd be okay. I will be okay. And I can say again, a year later, I'm okay.
Yeah, there's a certain belief you said initially that you would initially get into things because you believe that you would figure it out, as you did. It can be hard, it can be stressful, but you'll figure it out and you'll be okay. And so having that belief has, I think, supported you in being able to launch yourself into these different experiences.
Yeah, for sure. And the lesson I learned that from of everything's going to be okay is from my mom, because my mom had me when she was in high school and she raised my sister and I as a single mom until she met the man I consider to be my father. But watching her go through struggles of having to raise two little girls as a young woman was something that I just learned inherently from my mom. And I can give a very specific example of this that I use on my campaign, but Guam is hit by a lot of typhoons. I think some people might have heard back in May, hit by a really bad typhoon. My grandparents like just got their power and water back not too long ago. So it's been like 2 or 3 months, but I lived through that. And when that happens, you really have to go in like crisis mode, right? What are you going to do? What can you do with the little resources you're given? Because a typhoon at the time when I was there was also like $1 billion damage across the island. No power. I remember going to school without power. My parents had to hand feed my siblings and I so that we conserve the water that we had. I had to sleep on the floor to stay cool. My mom, again, and just this demonstration of resiliency and everything is going to be okay, she would heat up canned food by candlelight so that we could have a hot meal. She would put out big buckets. I remember this very specifically, an orange tub of water out on our yard to sit in the sun all day so we could have a hot bath at night. Being able to be resourceful, even in times of disaster or destruction, and just knowing that as long as you make little steps, you'll be fine. I learned that from my mom.
That's a beautiful example, learning from your mother and her going through all of that and thinking about all those little details to make it work through those typhoons. Now, going to something a little bit different, do you have maybe a moment, a story or a memory of a situation where you felt very respected?
There are two things. I'll talk about the one that relates to the respected part, especially when you are a woman and you are a minority in a dominated field. There are little things that can make you, that add up to make you feel disrespected. And for me, they weren't so blatant. I think we call them, when I am experiencing microaggressions is when I feel the most disrespected in conversation or at work. So what that looked like for me was being in meetings, being the only woman in the room, and me, again, in my growth journey of communication, just having the courage to just put an idea out there and essentially not even being shot down. Like they would just look at me and continue on the conversation as if I didn't say anything. Yeah, the opposite to that though was, and this is a very specific example. I was working with a female engineer and she noticed that this was happening. And I felt so respected that she pulled me to the side and said, "Hey, that's not cool. What can we do about it?" And we ended up going with, I think she called it the Obama method. And I'm going to mess this up, but I guess Obama's staffers did this exercise where if they noticed other women were talking and being ignored, they would pipe up and band together as a group and echo what that woman said to just raise her voice a little bit. So that's what we started doing in meetings. If she was giving examples of things that, that she wanted to talk about or ideas that she wanted to share, I would then make sure to make a conscious effort to re-echo and say, "Hey, she brought this up. What do you all think?" And engage in the conversation in that way. And actually by doing that exercise, by having each other's back, communication and conversation wise, that gave me more confidence to speak up as well.
I've heard of the Obama method, and yeah, Michelle used to use that. I haven't heard from one of the guests it actually being used in meetings, but I'm glad to hear that it worked. And it seems like what made you feel respected was that this engineer, that the senior engineer was interested in helping you and making sure that your voice was heard in the meeting.
Yeah, allyship is just so important. And you don't have to be in the minority to be an ally. You can be anybody. If you notice that there's something wrong, speak up, because you probably have a lot more power and influence than they do. But
Yeah,
it's a team effort for sure.
it's definitely a team effort. Yeah, and I think it's a great example. What do you do to respect other people when you're in a really hard conversation with them?
Yeah. So for sure, this Obama method, and I, especially as a leader, again, it's more emotionally taxing to do this, but it's important to read the room. When you notice someone's not speaking up, maybe you might not want to put them on the spot right away, but you might want to maybe on the side say, hey, did you feel comfortable in that meeting? Really engage with, especially when you're in conversations with large amounts of people, to be able to be in tune with how the room is feeling. And I found that when I ask for feedback all the time from my team that I work with, both with Code with Her and at work, and they all tell me that they appreciate that I do that, because it makes them feel heard. And I think in turn that leads to respect too.
Yeah, that probably makes them feel very respected for sure, because now they're being heard, even if they're quiet, because maybe they're going through their own communication improvement journey and they're trying to find their courage to even speak up for 5 seconds, like you
Yeah,
were in the beginning. Yeah.
exactly. Yeah, I wish I had someone like that earlier, but you know what? It comes in time. And I do believe I really believe that if you tell people what you want to work on and you tell people what your hopes and dreams are, I think at times we can feel a little guarded because we feel like it's our own little secret and we have to work on the things that we want to improve on or the goals that we want to meet and exceed. But really what I found too through all my experience from dance and Congress and Code with Her and work is that when you put it out into the universe and you tell people what you want, they're going to keep you in mind to help you out. I do actually really believe that more people are supportive than not. So it's just going to make your journey a little less hard and difficult if you share your hopes and dreams with everybody else.
I agree. And I think that's a fantastic reminder, because sometimes the things that we want or the challenges that we're having, there's for sure there are people around us that can support us. And I would say not only just sharing our hopes and dreams, but resharing it and talking about those things that we want quite often, because people are busy, even though they do want to support us, they're busy as well.
Yeah.
And it's on us to make sure that they know what is it that we're looking for. Plus, in that example that you gave, for those who are starting their journey and having trouble sharing their voices in a meeting and making it heard instead of people brushing them off, potentially proactively seeking out, let's say, the other women who come to the meeting and offering the Alabama method and saying, hey, let's do this. That could be a nice way to go as well.
Exactly.
All right. Thank you so much, Kylie, for sharing these stories on respect, on your journey from your background, and how you've positioned yourself and how you've managed your own emotions and stress and found the courage to launch yourself into all these new opportunities, and how you've been growing through each one of these experiences and developing yourself and your communication. And it shows that, yes, we can actually accelerate our growth by taking on opportunities, reflecting, listening to people, getting feedback, and not taking things personally. So thank you.
Thank you for having me.